All right, we might make a start. So thank you everybody for coming to our Law Week webinar. It does appear that some of you were here yesterday, which was great. So our principal, Rosalind, talked about intellectual property and branding. So my name is Ruth and I'm a lawyer at Gladwin Legal. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the legal essentials of starting a business. So it can be really exciting when you're starting a business. However, a lot of people can overlook the legal side of things or, get a bit overwhelmed with what to do on that side. Or, they might jump straight into their business and, sales and things without considering their legal needs, only to run into issues in the future. So today's webinar is just a broad brush sort of overview of the main legal considerations when starting your business to help you stay compliant and prepared. All right. So this is a bit of the outline we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about different business structures, the registrations you may need when you start your business, some key items to consider with your goods and services. You also want to consider some things with advertising where it's quite, it can be tightly regulated at times. And then we'll look at the locations of your business, whether that's, a physical bricks and mortar store, or whether, nowadays you have this online business, e-commerce, that can be very popular. And then we'll have a look at like workers, and employees and contractors. All right, so the first thing to talk about or to consider when you are starting a business is how it's going to be structured. So you want to consider whether it is just going to be you, or are you going into business with another party, perhaps a friend, a business partner? There's several structures you can pick from. But the key ones are a sole trader. So that is where, it's just you. You will still need to register an ABN, and everything sort of comes under yourself, So all your assets and liabilities, that's all just yourself. It's different from, let's say, if you have a partnership, you're going into business with, one or more other people, and you can share your debts and losses as well if anything happens to the business. With a partnership, the key thing there is to have a partnership agreement. So that needs to clearly set out the roles, the authority and, the liabilities of each partner. And you also need to set out in that, the distribution of profits and assets. Sometimes I will review people's partnerships agreement, and I can tell because it's sometimes people will just use something, they found online, like a template. And I think that's fine, like for a base. And I think, especially as a startup, sometimes people do not have the capital to get one like drafted from scratch. So they may find, a template online. But I think the key issues there are that it really is just that, a template. It doesn't consider the unique needs of your business, and often they're not tailored to the specific arrangement between the parties. And the other issue there is sometimes they will, there'll be a like US-based template provider or something like that. So it's a bit difficult to get to have it apply in Australia because the laws are different. So that's a common pitfall I kind of see, like people that just find their templates online and then, want to be well protected. It can be sometimes quite difficult. So the next sort of structure to consider is your company. So a company is generally the type of business structure we suggest for businesses. And the reason for this is because a company is a separate legal entity from from yourself. So it's treated as like a legal person under the law. So this means that even if you're one person, so you can be a like a one-person company. Even if you're one person, but you've established a Pty Ltd company, then your assets and liabilities, your personal assets are protected. So you kind of have, okay, your company assets and then your personal ones. So this is why it's helpful. It's so that, you know, if your company goes under or anything, you can protect your personal assets. And yeah, it doesn't come under those of your business. So the key things to think about with a company are it needs to be registered properly with ASIC, which governs, you know, corporations in Australia. Another thing to think about is if you are not if you're not just one person, if you have multiple people in your business or under your company, you want to think about getting a shareholders agreement. So sort of like previously how we talked about, you know, getting a partnership agreement, things like that. Same thing here, like you want to get a shareholders agreement so it sets out, you know, the rights of each shareholder, how that all works, what happens if you know, the business ends or somebody wants to leave the company. Sometimes what we have is we have issues where, let's say a business has been going on for a while, and then later on, you know, one shareholder wants to leave the company, and then they don't have a shareholders agreement, or there's not really any exit plan with what happens to the shares, and then we run into issues there, and that's often, you know, it can be a costly and lengthy dispute, because, you know, with shares, with assets, there's all this money in the business, and then if somebody leaves, they don't know how to split it. So that's when a dispute can arise. So the best way, I think, in general, to approach your business is to have a proactive rather than reactive approach to things. So you want to think about like things that can go wrong, which sounds bad, but yeah, you want to think prior. Okay, if something ends, if this business, you know, goes wrong, somebody leaves, what can I do now that will protect my business for the future? So one way to do that is to consider, you know, getting agreements in place that literally set out, okay, you know, shareholder wants to exit the business, this is the process, this is what happens. And then it saves a lot of like heartache and hassle in the future. The other thing with a company is that if you're a director, there are directors' duties under the law. So that's things like, okay, you know, acting in the best interest of the company. You have reporting obligations. You have obligations of, you know, not having a conflict with your personal interest, things like that. So that also comes along with being a director of a company. And also, everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or, yeah, in our question and answer box, and we can talk about it now or at the end. But yeah, feel free to add in questions. Another structure you can consider is a trust structure. So a trust is a legal relationship where there is a trustee and a beneficiary. So in this sort of sense, the trustee will hold your company assets on trust for the beneficiaries. And whoever the trustee is legally responsible. The trustee can itself be a company or an individual. The things with a trust structure is it can be a complicated setup. And again, you'll need like formal documentation. So you'll need a trust deed, which sets out the details of, the trustees and the beneficiaries, how the trust operates. In considering, which is the best structure, we've talked about a couple. We've talked about, sole trader, partnership, company, trust. Those are like the main ones. Which is best? So again, like the classic lawyer answer, it depends. But generally, we recommend a company because of that, that limited liability sort of structure. But it depends on your specific business needs. You're really welcome to like book in a free consultation or anything with us if you want to chat about what might suit your business. Another factor to consider, which may assist, is that depending on which structure you have, the tax implications are different. So companies tax at, flat rate, and trust has different tax implications as well. So that might be something to consider when you're thinking about how you want to structure your business. However, I'm not an accountant or a financial advisor, so that's something that you can talk to your financial advisor about, and they'll be able to advise you on, how your business structure plays into the finances of things. All right, so the next thing that we want to talk about is registrations. All right, so there's a bunch of things you want to consider when you are setting up your business in regards to registrations. So the first thing is a business number, right? An ABN. It helps to identify your business. And you need to, if you're operating, no matter how you're operating, even as a sole trader, you need to have an ABN. You can register it online. The next thing to consider is a business name. So you need to register a business name if you're conducting business under a name that's, not your own. So even if, and that includes if you're a company, but you're trading under a different name. So for example, okay, let's say my company is called, Fanciful Pants with Ruth Proprietary Limited, Pty Ltd. Okay, so this is my company name. But let's say, like for my business, I just trade as Fancy Pants, and this is the name on my logo, it's the name on my website, it's my Instagram handle, okay, all of this. If that is the case, then even though I'm my company name is Fanciful Pants with Ruth, Pty Ltd, okay, you need to register Fancy Pants, or I need to do that as my business name, because I'm not trading under Fanciful Pants with Ruth, I'm trading under Fancy Pants. Okay, so this is why it's important to get your business names registered. All right. The other things are just like normal business things. So, getting a tax file number for your tax purposes. If you have employees, and we'll talk a little bit more about, employees and workers later, but think about, okay, what you need to do there. So you need to register for pay-as-you-go, pay-YG, withholding. Sometimes you may need to register for fringe benefits tax if you're providing fringe benefits to your employees. So fringe benefits are those ones that, it's like paying your employees, but not like with wages or salary. So for example, you might pay for their gym membership, or like allow them to use a work car for private purposes. So that kind of thing is a fringe benefit. And if you're providing that for your employees, that's when you might need to register for fringe benefits tax. The other thing to consider is goods and services tax, GST. If you have an annual turnover, annual GST turnover of 75,000 or more, it's required that you register for GST. If it's under that, it's optional, but it can be a good way to, especially if you're starting out as a business, to, show to the world that, okay, yes, this is legitimate. I'm registered for GST, I might have a company, all these things sort of like add legitimacy to your business. So that's something to consider as well. The other thing to consider is trademarking. So I won't go into too much detail on trademarks and branding because yesterday Rosalind covered it. And last year I also did a talk on trademarks. So you can find that on our YouTube as well. But basically, if you want exclusive rights to your branding, you need to register a trademark. So a common misconception or pitfall is that many people assume that just because they have, registered a business name or they, have a logo, that they have exclusive rights to that name, and they can enforce it against others. This isn't the case. If you want exclusive rights over, your logo, your brand name and stuff, you've got to register it as a trademark. And this helps you, in the case there's a dispute, to enforce your rights against others. So what we've had a common pitfall is where, often like disputes will arise because, there might be a business that has they have their brand and they've been building their reputation up, and a lot of people, associate good things with their brand. And then a business comes along later and they're trying to profit off that with like a similar brand. Okay, like a really like silly example is like, okay, let's say I have, Nike or something, and like the tick is very popular. And then, you might go to a shop in, a dodgy suburb or something, and it's like a $2 shop and they have like Noki or something, or like Nike with a Y or something, where they're trying to benefit off the brand somebody else has built. Okay, so things like that, it's helpful to have a registered trademark. So there is some protections you can get under common law, but it can be difficult to enforce sometimes, right? It's a lot stronger, like if you're in a dispute, to be able to point to, IP Australia and the trademarks register and be like, hey, this is my number, this is my registered trademark number. You can see it on the register. I've had it for this long, blah, blah, blah. That's a lot more stronger. And you'll be able to enforce your rights easier with that. The other thing to consider with your registrations is a website domain. So most businesses now have a website in this day and age. So make sure you get a website domain. You can just do that online. Some popular ones I think are like, GoDaddy.com, I think is one of them. So have a think about registering your domain name. All right, so the next thing we are going to look at is your goods and services. All right, so it's important to consider what sort of goods and services you're offering, and then making sure you're getting the right types of agreements to cover these. Okay, so for example, for goods, if you're getting those manufactured, or like a lot of times, people just have like a manufacturer or supplier and they're just, doing the selling, they're doing the retailing, but somebody else is actually creating their goods and services, right? So if you have, if you're, outsourcing, or you're getting, a supplier manufacturing company to do something for you, it's really important to get that in writing, get your agreements in writing. And yeah, like key things in a manufacturing agreement you might want to consider is it should cover all the commercial details and it should be clear, right? So things like, normal things from like date of delivery, number of like items or like units you're getting, quality of product, what happens if there are any issues with supply, okay, and who bears that loss. If a customer has gotten, bought something for you, but there's supply issues from a manufacturer, who bears the loss there, what happens. So that's all things that an agreement and a good agreement with comprehensive clauses can cover. Other things, if you are selling a service, or let's say you're selling a software as a service, something like that, you want to consider, having terms for, whoever develops your software, so having that sort of services agreement with your software developer, and then also having terms that cover when people actually access your platform or your service, so terms of use. Other things are just, your general policies and things like returns policies, what happens when a customer wants to return your item, just normal consumer policies. And then on that, an area we need to discuss is the Australian consumer law. So the Australian Consumer Law is a schedule in the Competition and Consumer Act, and it governs a lot of consumer transactions, especially ones that apply with businesses. So the key aspects I want to cover today with the Australian Consumer Law, firstly, consumer guarantees. So you may have heard of them before. Pretty much the consumer guarantees are automatic rights that apply to consumers. So they automatically get these rights under Australian law, and you can't contract out of them. So it means, if I have my terms for my retail terms, I can't write in my contract, the Australian consumer law doesn't apply, or the consumer guarantees don't apply. I can't do that. Like, that's illegal. You can't put that in your contract. So they're basic sets of rights for consumers. You can just Google them, but pretty much they are guarantees that, there's a certain level of expectations for goods and services when they're provided, in Australia. So things like they're of acceptable quality, they fit the purpose they were advertised at, or they fit their description, things like that, So basically it's to protect consumers that, they're not getting a product or a service that's not up to standard. And under the consumer guarantees, consumers have an automatic right to get a remedy if one of the consumer guarantees are breached. So this may be a repair, a refund, or a replacement, or a cancellation. And different remedies apply depending on, the severity of the breach, and the nature of the breach. So that's automatic, and just an important takeaway there is that you can't exclude them. And you also can't mislead your consumers about their rights under the consumer guarantees, but we will talk a little bit more about that after. The other important aspect under the Australian consumer law is on warranties. So you might provide a warranty with your business, with a product or a service with your business. But remember that the consumer guarantees are almost sort of like warranties already, right? So I think a common mistake I see with businesses is they will provide a warranty to their customers, but then it doesn't give the consumer anything extra than what they already have under the Australian consumer law. So for example, let's say, I'm going to give a 30-day warranty for my product, where you get a refund if something is wrong with your product. you know. So that's like probably pretty common, like you would see something like that. But the thing is that Australian consumer law and the consumer guarantees, they already give you that. So they already, like as we talked about before, like, you know, you can get a refund already for a reasonable, like within a reasonable period of time. If there's something wrong with your goods, you know, it didn't match its description, it wasn't fit for its purpose, things like that. So the warranty that you're providing or purportedly providing isn't actually, you know, giving you anything extra. So basically the guideline is that if you are giving a warranty, it has to go above and beyond what what a consumer already gets under the Australian consumer law. Otherwise, it could be, in some cases, like be a bit misleading about their rights. So for example, instead of that 30-day, you know, you get a refund, you might be like, okay, you get a lifetime, you know, warranty for a replacement of your goods, blah, 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 if this happens, okay, or if it breaks down. Like that goes above and beyond the Australian consumer law because the Australian consumer law says, you know, you get a refund for like a reasonable amount of time or something, you know? So like, that's just an example, but that's sort of, you know, the vibe of warranties. All right, so the next thing we want to consider is advertising. So we touched on this a bit before, but with advertising, you want to also consider the Australian consumer law. So the key provision with this is misleading and deceptive conduct. So misleading and deceptive conduct is illegal. And the main, like, it's quite self-explanatory, but I think the important things to note is that yes, you can't mislead or deceive consumers in your advertising, and you also can't have conduct that's likely to mislead or deceive, and your intention doesn't matter. So let's say the ACCC comes after you, all right, they are, you know, the enforcement power that are enforcing the consumer laws. Let's say they come after you and you're like, oh, you know, like I didn't mean to, I didn't intend for this to happen. Like they don't, you know, they don't really consider that. It's a bit more objective. So it's sort of like, okay, did this, they'll look at your conduct and they'll be like, okay, did this, you know, mislead or deceive, or was it likely to? And if it was yes, it was yes, you know, you may get a fine, you may get a penalty, something like that. It doesn't really matter if you were like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. So it's something to be aware of. Some key things with advertising might be like strike through or like is pricing. Let's say you're selling clothes, okay, and it was like, oh, it was $39.99, and now it's like $15 or something. A key thing with that sort of strikeout is pricing is that you need to be able to show that it actually was that price for a reasonable amount of time. Okay, sometimes, you know, people try to do like things that are a bit dodgy where they will advertise something that is, yes, like they'll say, okay, it was $39.99 or something, but it was never actually that price. So the consumer thinks they're getting a good deal, but actually it's like false because it was never at that price. I've been seeing it at the supermarkets a bit more recently where now on the labels, they'll write, okay, like down, prices down, or like something, you know, they'll say new low price. And then in small text, they'll be like previously March 2024 was, you know, strawberries were $5 a pound and now they're $3. Okay, so it clearly states like when it was at that previous price. So I don't know whether that's something I've just realized more now or something that they've always done, but that's sort of an example of, okay, trying to be able to show or like being clear that it was actually at that price. So it's not like you don't actually probably need to write that, yeah, on this date, from this date to this date, it was that price, but it's more like if somebody comes after you, right, if you get investigated, there is something you can point back to, like some record that's like, nah, we did actually sell it for that price for a little bit of time. The other things to think about with advertising, okay, is greenwashing. So this is a common area that has sort of been investigated recently, but I think it's basically that, you know, a lot of consumers want to appeal to, a lot of businesses want to appeal to, you know, natural, organic, like things that are good for the environment. But then they come under flack from like the ACCC or, you know, the investigatory bodies for misleading their consumers because it's not actually as environmentally friendly as they advertise it to be. So that's something to be aware of. Mainly, you want to consider the overall impression that something gives to the consumer. So sometimes you can have a disclaimer, and it's fine. You know, a lot of businesses have like a disclaimer, like with a little asterisk, and then at the bottom and be like, oh, by the way, like, you know, this disclaimer. But it's also like the general impression it gives. So if it says like, if it's like 50% or like 80% off store wide, and then at the bottom there's just like this tiny little disclaimer that's like only on products in, you know, June 2024 or like or something, like it could be seen as misleading because the overall impression is like the 80% off, you know, store wide. So you can have a disclaimer, but make sure it's not like too little. And it's also about like the overall impression that the consumer gets. And the penalties, you know, are, yes, fines. They can be pretty hefty. And an infringement notice, like the ACCC can publish an infringement notice, things like that. So yeah, they can, like, claims or investigations from the ACCC can harm your business reputation. If you go on the ACCC website, they have like public press releases, and you'll see, you know, all the like big companies even, they'll be like, oh, so and so got a fine for blah blah blah, and you know, your company or your business is just up there for the whole public to see that you breached the consumer law or whatever it is. So it's something important to think about, because you don't want to, you know, have built a great brand and reputation and then you get hit with an infringement notice or something like that. It's not like you can't recover, but it does, especially for startups. You know, it's important to maintain, like health in your business. The other thing to consider is the Spam Act. So, you know, every time we're like, oh, we receive email spam, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, it's actually an act. So the Spam Act just governs like, you know, those kind of communication. So whether that's, you know, text message advertising, email marketing, the main things with that is that you provide an easy way for your consumers to opt out. So you'll often see it, you know, click here to unsubscribe, or, you know, text opt out, stop receiving communications. That's there because it's required under the law. Yeah, you need to have your business be able to be identified. So, you know, you're receiving this message from Fancy Pants with Ruth or whatever. This is how you can opt out if you no longer want to receive communications. So that's just something to know. All right, let's move on to location. All right, so key things you'll have is generally most businesses are online now, and you may have a bricks and mortar, like a physical store as well. So if you have a bricks and mortar store, most of the time, like, unless you bought the commercial property, it'll be a lease. So if you haven't been the party to draft the lease, and assuming you are the tenant, it is really important to get your lease reviewed. So when the landlord gives you, you know, your commercial lease agreement, you give it to a lawyer. Doesn't have to be us. I won't get mad. But you give it to a lawyer and you get them to review it to see, you know, what you're signing into, okay? Whether you're signing your life away. You want to, just look at like key provisions. So your lawyer will review it and let you know. But often we just try and we see like landlords doing sneaky things. They'll just like put things in that they don't expect the tenant to really read properly. Things like make good clauses, so which is pretty common, but make good is sort of like, okay, when you leave the premises, what happens at the end? What standard do you have to make the property good to before you leave? And sometimes, it's not just like a, leave it the way you found it. Sometimes, you have to do additional renovations or leave it to a different standard or replace the floors or something. Other things are like relocation or demolition clauses. So if something happens to the actual physical property, what happens to your business and your lease arrangement? Can they just kick you out? What happens there? And then also like just things like rent increases, how is it increased? Is it CPI? Is it a fixed percentage? Things like that. And, there's a bunch of other standard clauses in a lease agreement, but it's good to have a legal professional look over. If it's an online business, you will need just like some basic legal documents. So almost any website for a store you go into, you always see like in their footer, they might have like website terms, and then they'll have a privacy policy. Those are just like key agreements for businesses. So your website terms just set out how people, what happens when people use and access your website. It protects your business and limits your liability. And then the privacy policy is required under the Privacy Act if you have an annual turnover of over $3 million or you're another specific type of business. But it's also like recommended even if you don't hit that turnover, because just of like the nature of business and data nowadays. Like you would have seen last year, the string of, data breaches that came about. And, not saying that a privacy policy will automatically mean, data breaches are fine and you won't get that happen to you, but it helps protect your customers in that sense. So a privacy policy is for, your customers, and it's because and it's to protect their privacy. So when they are using your website or signing up to your platform or buying things from you, you're getting information from them. So you're getting, their name, their address, their phone number. Like this is all, private personal information. So your privacy policy will set out how you're using that information, who you're disclosing it to, whether you are storing any information, and some businesses can come under flack because they aren't clear about how they use their customers' information. So I was reading recently about Flow, I think. I'm not sure, but it was some sort of, it was like a menstrual cycle, like a period tracker app. And, you will enter your things, your information in there, and it collects the data. But this company, I'm not sure what it was came under investigation or something, because they were selling that data to third parties. And that's something you have to think about. If you are selling your data, customer data, it needs to be put out in your privacy policy so that customers know, and that so their privacy isn't breached if they don't want that information to be shared. So yeah, that's important to think about. And also that, data can't be stored for more than reasonably necessary. So if you're only using it for a certain purpose, you can't use it at a certain purpose that you've disclosed in your privacy policy. You can't then, sell it or keep it for longer than 10 years or something if you haven't written it out and if customers don't know. And then your privacy policy also needs to have a way that people can edit their information or just like, retract it or just say, don't use it. So usually it's like the contact details of a privacy officer, somebody at your company, or just, a contact form where they can contact your team about, aspects of their privacy or about their information, where they don't want you to hold it. So the last thing we're going to look at is workers. All right. So key things here are whether your worker is an employee or a contractor. So employment law, I love employment law. I do a bit of it here at Gladwin Legal, but not a whole lot of it. But I do love it because it's always changing and it's very interesting. And there's a lot of cases that come to court about it. So with employment law, a key area that has come into courts a lot is about whether they're an employee or a contractor. And the reason why that matters is because employees have certain rights under the law. They have, they're protected by national employment standards. They'll have to be paid like things like leave, all that part-time, leave entitlement, sick leave. They're protected by those standards. Contractors, you're independent. So, you might be operating under your own ABN and you're just under a services agreement. Okay, so it's different there, and it can be difficult because sometimes if it's not clear or the worker hasn't signed, an employment contract, things like that, they might try and claim employee entitlements under the national employment standards when they're actually a contractor and they're not entitled to that. So that's something to consider. The key thing to note there is to have clear agreements. So whether it's an employment agreement or services like a contractor agreement, that will change. But then courts also look to the actual nature of the relationship, right? So let's say they've signed a contractor agreement, but their relationship is more like an employee agreement. The court might look at that as well. So it's a key area, but yeah, just make sure it's clear their responsibilities, the nature of their work, and things like that. And similarly to that, there's also this distinction in employment law about, casual and part-time employees, because that is also a matter of, claiming entitlements. So, part-time employees will get things like sick leave, like things like that. Casual employees, the start to the end of your shift is considered, your term of employment. You might get another shift, you might not. The nature of casual employment is that, there's no ongoing expectation to ongoing work. And like, don't quote me on that, but they're introducing, or they've introduced, an actual definition of casual employees into the Fair Work Act. And there's been recent changes to legislation there as well, because again, there was situations in courts, litigation and disputes where people are casual employees, but they're like, hey, I am actually a part-time employee and I, deserve these certain employment entitlements because I'm not because I have regular working hours, things like that. And then they try to claim part-time or permanent employment, benefits. So yeah, it's something to be aware of in your working arrangements, right? And then the other thing with employment is that if you have employees, they're generally covered by a modern award or enterprise agreement. So it's important to check which one applies and check that you're being compliant with that, and also the Fair Work Act. And from the financial side of things, again, it would be best to talk to an accountant about it. So if you're not sure about pay, okay, if you're not sure about, how you're meant to, what sort of tax obligations or things like super, it's best to, chat to your financial advisor. And then also, like, we can, if you want to chat to a lawyer, we'll do all the legal side. So, your employment agreements, your services agreements, we can do that for you. All right, so that is all we have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this sort of discussion on like the key aspects of your business. If we go back to the start, we'll just like review a bit. So yeah, think about your structure, sole trader, partnership, company, trust, that kind of thing. Think about your registrations, things like a business name, all right, your trademarks, your domain name, registering for things like GST, fringe benefits tax. For goods and services, you want to be clear what you're offering, and you want to think about the agreements that govern those, and make sure you're governed there. With advertising, you want to consider, the Australian consumer law and being compliant there. Locations are about getting your lease reviews and checking that, your online terms check out, that you have your privacy policy. And with workers, it's just important to characterize them properly, whether they are a employee, a contractor, a casual or part-time employee. Right. But other than that, thank you so much for coming to our Law Week webinar. And we will give you the recording, and I hope to, hear from you guys soon.